everyone, my name is Julie Rostan. I'm a PhD student at SAMS on the west coast of Scotland, and today I'm going to tell you about my work exploring the social license to operate for seaweed farming for biofuels. First, I should start by defining seaweed farming, also called seaweed cultivation or seaweed aquaculture, which is the process of introduction and cultivation of microalgae on an artificial substrate, such as a rope, as you can see on the picture. Seaweed cultivation should not be confused with the practice of wild harvesting, which is the removal of wild seaweed from the seabed. Most of the seaweed aquaculture is currently taking place in China and Indonesia, but there is a potential for worldwide cultivation and a willingness to develop new markets for seaweed that would allow to replace fossil fuel-based products. In Europe, the demand for these products is expected to increase by 2030 for animal feed, food products, or cosmetics, but the lowest demand is expected to be for biofuels. Nevertheless, there has been an interest in the production of third-generation biofuels from seaweed, not only for transport, but also for biogas production, for electricity, or heating. I investigate the social implications on the path of development of seaweed industry towards bioenergy production in the Interreg 5A area, which is the west coast of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the north of the Republic of Ireland. The focus of this presentation will be on the social license to operate, or SLO. This concept was born in the 90s when James Cooney emphasized the economic risk of community resistance to new projects. According to Boutier and Thompson's model, it goes from a state of acceptance to a state of psychological identification, which is a sign of real integration of the activity within the community. In their model, legitimacy and trust aspects are key boundaries and measurement parameters of SLO. This SLO is granted by a community of interest, which includes the local community and all the interested stakeholders beyond the local area. The main challenge was to try to understand key factors to earn SLO for an activity that is not operating yet in the local communities of my research area. I made the following assumption that a priori perception can inform on the potential SLO for future projects. The first part of my project aimed to study what shapes public perception before people become familiar with the activity and determine how this can inform on its potential future SLO. The second part of the project focuses on the vision for the future of the seaweed farming industry and its social license to operate from the perspective of expert stakeholders. Public perception of farming seaweed for bioenergy. For that, I conducted a general public survey in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Ireland, distributed online and through social media and university networks, as well as face-to-face in 16 coastal towns, and we gathered 767 responses. The major result was that the a priori perception of seaweed farming for biofuel is mainly positive. People who had a positive perception justified it in their comments because of the potential positive effect on local and global environment of seaweed farming and also of the use of seaweed product, as well as the potential social and economic benefits through employment or boosting rural areas. These positive respondents also demonstrated many worries and cautiousness in their responses, which were similar to the justification given by people who responded negatively. These were about the potential negative effect on the environment, but also a perception of a lack of efficiency and economic viability. Also, that priority should be given to food production from seaweed and not bioenergy. But the most stated worry was about the scale of production, on which I will come back a bit later. Beyond the perception of the activity in general, respondents were asked about their hypothetical support for a project close to where they live. As you can see, most of them responded they would be supportive. Not a lot responded they would be very supportive. This is due to the fact that their support came along with a certain number of conditions, which could be potentially crucial for social license to operate. We find again that many of these factors were relating to the previous themes of environmental benefit, socioeconomic benefits, and relationship with the company as well. But this time, the comments were more anchored in local and personal consideration. Here in this citation, the respondent was worried about the effect of seaweed farming on his own home. The opposed and supportive comments strongly highlighted the need for transparent information to reduce uncertainty, and there is a strong willingness to engage in dialogue with the company to be heard and actively involved to develop trust and potentially allowing the industry to get a strong support in the future. Lastly, to come back to the size aspect, there was a preference for small-scale seaweed farming operation, which is associated with the perception of local ownership and benefit to the environment and local community, as opposed to large seaweed farm, which are perceived as higher risk for the environment, involving large corporation and being less beneficial to local communities. Even though the idea of biofuel production from seaweed appeared appealing for participants as an alternative source of energy, the perception of large-scale farming associated with that was a source of worry for many participants. Where do perceptions come from? Through the qualitative analysis of the comment, I used the social representation theory to understand how these perceptions are shaped. This theory states that individual views are shaped by social norms, culture, beliefs, knowledge, and language, which means that diverse external factors can shape the perception of a new industry. For this activity of seaweed farming for biofuel, which was mostly unfamiliar to a lot of participants, they shaped their perception through comparisons to more familiar and somehow related objects, such as fish farming or renewable energy, which are present in the local area, but also to comparisons to more distant activities, such as first-generation biofuels, which they may have heard of in the media. So I'll take the example of fish farming, which is very present in this area. When respondents thought by analogy to fish farming, they tend to lead to negative perception of seaweed farming. They would, for example, say things like, I think it would be like fish farming, and be to such a scale that it would have an impact elsewhere on the marine environment, and that would be overlooked due to profits. These analogies were justified by factors like mistrust toward fish farming companies, lack of socioeconomic benefits to local communities, and environmental damages caused by the industry. However, many respondents thought about seaweed farming through opposition to their perception of fish farming. Like here, it is not as harmful as fish farms, and it will be beneficial to the environment depending on how much space it's used. Again, justifications are in relation to environmental and socioeconomic benefits and associated to positive attitudes to the company. So what does this mean for a social license to operate? Through the qualitative analysis, we're able to link the explanatory factors to the main parameters of social license to operate. For legitimacy, environmental aspects are the main concerns for the respondents. Social and economic factors such as job creation and preservation of the local community's life world were more predominant when discussing potential development close to their home. These also linking to trust, the second major parameter of social license to operate. For trusts, providing transparent information and dialogue and developing a mutually beneficial relationship with the developer already appeared as crucial among these responses. After studying public perceptions, I focus on the vision of expert stakeholders on the future of the industry, focusing this time on Scotland. For that, I conducted pilot workshops in 2020, but I finally had to move to online data collection through focus group discussions and interviews with experts such as scientists, members of the seaweed industry, regulators, and also advocacy organizations. Preliminary results showed a variety of visions for the development of the industry, from a more regionalized to a more globalized one. The regionalized vision is characterized by smaller coastal farms locally owned. The globalized one is characterized by larger scale operations, potentially mechanized, producing important biomass and owned by larger companies. There are many in-between visions, including medium-sized farms to the expectation of diverse types of farms. Among experts from Scotland, there is a preference for a more regionalized scenario aspect, mainly due to the argument of promoting local community benefits. The Scottish seaweed industry priority focuses mainly on food products and high-value products, and the production of bioenergy is not a priority for these stakeholders. Similarly, then, for the members of the public, bioenergy is linked to a more globalized vision of the activity. And there was also a consensus on the fact that increasing the scale and leading towards a more globalized industry is a risk for social license to operate, in agreement with the findings from the general public. Conclusions and next steps. The scale and associated perceptions will represent a key factor for social license to operate. The context is key, and understanding perception of other industries might help understanding specific issues for SLO in specific communities. To earn SLO, a strong emphasis on communication should be given to develop trust. If the current vision on bioenergy from seaweed is still associated with the perception of large-scale and intensive industry, there is a potential for smaller-scale use and circular economy aspects that might fit more within the regionalized scenario and also fit more with SLO. Until now, I focused on the vision from the seaweed industry stakeholders, but there is still an important body of stakeholders to be included in that study, which are members of the energy sectors, to understand what could be the role of seaweed in the energy sector in the future. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to responding to your questions.